So Battlefield 6 has been having what seems to be like a bit of a rough time retaining a lot of players. Basically, we've been seeing the player count dropping pretty steadily since around December. We saw some of the lowest figures in the month of December, and then again throughout January. Now we're seeing that player count just kind of keep dropping, with today reaching around, I think it was 85,000 concurrent players. Of course, these are all Steam numbers and we can't really tell the full scope, but typically when we're looking at patterns, right, if it's happening in one place, it's more likely than not going to be happening in other places. This is leading a lot of Battlefield players to be really concerned with the possible future of what Battlefield 6 is going to be like. But more importantly, I think that what's happening right now might not necessarily be that Battlefield 6 is dying or anything like that, because definitely still having around 100,000 concurrent players daily is not a small number by any means, especially when we're just looking at Steam. But it's definitely concerning that it never really was able to reach that peak player count, or at least something around it. Again, it wasn't able to retain a lot of players the way that other games seem to be retaining. So I wanted to talk about that in today's video. Obviously, I don't want to say that it's all just doom and gloom, but I definitely think that something does need to change, and fast, so that it can actually recover. But before we do that, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications set to all so you can stay up to date with all of the Battlefield 6 content here in the channel, and let's just dive right on into it. So first up, there does seem to be a lot of negative sentiment surrounding Battlefield 6 right now. Whereas everybody seemed to be really excited before, it kind of feels like there's been a bit of a shift in the player base. Now I'm sure most people are just having fun and playing the game, but you definitely kind of see it online with how much negativity there is. People who are just talking about how there's nothing to do, the game is boring, things like that. What I think is part of the problem is that Season 1 was pretty underwhelming. We got 2 maps in total, we got 2 or 3 weapons or something like that, we got one really big variant for a map, and then we got, I want to say, a couple of game modes, and then RedSec, of course. But I think the problem is it was underwhelming in comparison to actually what we were expecting to see. And yes, of course, you know, maybe content wise it's not that bad, and I've said this before a couple of times. What we're looking at today is that players want more content than they used to in order for you to actually keep their attention, if the game doesn't actually rely on its base system being the content, something like that. So the problem with Battlefield 6 is that it takes up this live service model. So when you do that, you have to push more content. It's not really a choice. Once you take up that model, you have to do this. So what's happening is, in Season 1 we got 2 maps, both of which were relatively underwhelming compared to what players were expecting. Now personally, I'm not gonna lie here, I enjoyed Eastwood. I did not like Blackwell Fields. In fact, every time I use the custom search, Blackwell Fields never stays clicked. I do not like that map. I know some people did like it, but the vast, overwhelming opinion, at least from what I saw, was that Blackwell Fields was not a map that people were enjoying. Eastwood seemed to be a little more enjoyable. But again, most of the maps in the base game are not that fantastic. Most of them are just too small, they're not spread out enough, they don't have the elements that Battlefield players want. And so what you're left with is this thing that's sort of a hybrid between a Battlefield map and then a more fast-paced arcadey shooter map, and it's just not working with people. Now we know that DICE did hire someone who worked on some of the better maps in Battlefield 6 and some more larger maps in previous Battlefield titles. So what I'm hoping is that we can see in the future larger maps. But is that going to be Season 2 or Season 3? Because the thing is, if it's not Season 2, that is definitely going to damage the reputation that Battlefield 6 has. It's going to damage that goodwill that it built up from the beta period, which is already pretty damaged currently. I think the issue that occurred is that in the beta they had a really solid product, and then they started introducing changes and they didn't really deliver on what players were very explicitly telling them since the beta. The maps are too small, the gunplay needs improving, the movement needs improving, things like that. And every time they tried to fix something, they ended up breaking a lot of things that also needed fixing, and the balancing was off, and so we were left with a pretty underwhelming, broken Season 1. Obviously this isn't historically unique or anything to Battlefield as a franchise. I think we can all think back to every Battlefield game basically where the first season or so was very broken. Even Battlefield 4, as much as it was a gem by the end, was very broken in its beginning stages and was pretty underwhelming. It just needed more content before everybody could say that it was good. But the problem is we are now in a time where you can't really just hope for patience to click in the end with the fan base. You really gotta be more present from the beginning, and that's kind of what happened with Black Ops 7. Black Ops 7 didn't do those improvements right away. They were riding off of the negativity creativity from Black Ops 6, they just didn't do enough to convince disenfranchised players to come back with Black Ops 7, and obviously we saw that it was the worst Call of Duty game so far in terms of sales. Regardless of whether or not it's a good game, it doesn't really matter, because what happened is players just weren't interested in the product being offered. And the thing is, Battlefield 6 had built up so much hype, and it's kind of weird to see that fall off. Now, part of it could be a couple of things. One, people who had bought the game thinking it was one thing, and then they played a little bit, they just weren't that big of a fan of it at the end of the day because maybe Battlefield just isn't for them. Totally fine. Two, there's other games. We can't deny Arc Raiders is definitely a big deal right now in the industry. A lot of people are playing it, a lot of people are playing it with their friends. Arc Raiders isn't a game for everyone. Definitely the extraction shooter genre has never been a mass appeal game, but Arc Raiders is pretty unique in that it does have a mass appeal just because it simplified a lot of the things that people don't like about the genre. And so you have a lot of people who are playing that maybe with their friends more than Battlefield. Maybe some people have just finished what content that they really wanted to see in Battlefield. They completed some mastery stuff. They're hoping for some new content. They took a break. Right now, obviously, we're all going back to work and school and things like that. So you're gonna have just less people in general playing constantly. And then there are some regions of the world where they've had issues with matchmaking. The issues being that they just keep getting bot lobbies because they live in a low player population area. The way the matchmaking works is that it prioritizes getting you into a match quickly, but what ends up happening is that they can't populate the lobby with enough players, and so they start putting bots in, and then people end up playing with bots outside of a bot mode. So that definitely bothered a lot of people who are in different regions like Asia and Australia and things like that. And obviously there's a huge player base outside of Europe and North America, so we can't really deny that if those people kind of fell off of the game, that we would just see that number naturally decrease. And also, I just think that people just have lives, they're busy, there's a lot of other games to play. People aren't just going to be playing the same game constantly over and over, which is fine. You know, Battlefield doesn't encourage the same level of grind that Call of Duty does. As long as you're not really into the battle pass or anything like that, you don't really have a reason to play every single day constantly. If you're into the battle pass stuff, then yeah, you're gonna be playing every day, that's natural, but that's not the case for every single Battlefield player. But we definitely need new content, we need better maps. The number one problem I have with Battlefield 6 right now is the maps. We just need better maps, we need them very fast and very soon. And we definitely cannot get only one map in a season. If they do that for season 2, it's gonna be a really big problem. We need at least 2 maps in season 2, and they need to be good maps. We don't need small maps, no more close quarters maps, we have enough of those. But we need our larger maps, stuff that fits Battlefield. I think what could work, what could balance in season 2 is 2 original maps and 1 remastered map. Whatever that remastered map may be, you know, there's a couple of contenders out there that I've talked about here on the channel before. So we just need 2 to 3 maps and make one of them a remastered map just so we can bring back, you know, people for that nostalgia of playing on those older maps. And I just think that the game needs to fix some of the way that XP is earned and the progression. I know that some people don't have a problem with this, but honestly, I do think that the progression is just way too slow. It requires too much of a grind that is unnecessarily and I think artificially too much, because by the time you get to mastery on a weapon, especially if you're more of a casual player, and then you're in lobbies with people who aren't casual, they've mastered so many weapons by then, you can't really get a chance to work on a new weapon because it's just not going to be good enough to handle that. So I just think that there needs to be a better system that doesn't require you to have to use double XP tokens constantly, because again, with the double XP tokens, they run while you're not even in the game, which is ridiculous, but that's the case. At this point, I'm pretty good with the challenges. It is very annoying to have to keep re-rolling those Battle Royale related challenges, but for some people, I guess maybe they do play the Battle Royale and don't care. I just think that Battlefield 6 needs to do something with Season 2. It's a really important season for them, and I'm not going to say it's a make or break. As bad as 2042 was, it was still active up until basically Battlefield 6 came out. It was still very active. So for the most part, it's not like people are just going to abandon the game en masse, but it's definitely not going to do good for player goodwill if Season 2 does not do a good job in and of itself in improving the game and fixing some of the problems and bringing in good maps. We just need better maps. It does feel a little bit weird that we haven't had any communication whatsoever. Now, I don't know how long their holidays last, maybe with DICE because they're located in Sweden. I just know that in Europe they tend to take longer breaks than in North America, but I don't know. We'll have to see what's going on on that front. But anyways, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below how you're feeling about the current state of Battlefield 6, what you think needs to be improved, what you think should stay the same, those sorts of things. Leave a like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications set to all so you can stay up to date with all of the content here in the channel. And that's all for today, folks.